She was still in her wedding dress. The champagne was untouched. The rose petals hadn't been disturbed. The bridal suite smelled like gardenias and something that used to feel like hope. And then her phone lit up. The photo loaded slowly, the way awful things always do, as if the universe is giving you one last second to look away. It was her sister, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, wearing a white silk shirt that Celeste recognized immediately because she had packed it herself in her husband's luggage that morning. Standing behind her sister, fastening his watch, was Roman, her husband of 6 hours. If you were sitting in the hotel room right now, still in your wedding dress, roses on the floor, phone in your hand, what would you do? Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And after you watch, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that hotel room. Because what Celeste did next, nobody saw coming. The wedding had been exactly what Roman Vescari wanted it to be. 400 guests. A ballroom that cost more to rent for one evening than most people earned in a year. Flowers imported from the Netherlands. A string quartet that played until midnight. Security at every entrance dressed in suits that cost more than the catering. Celeste had walked down the aisle in a dress she had chosen alone because her mother had been dead for 13 years, and there was nobody left in the Whitmore family who knew how to be gentle with her. Her father had shaken Roman's hand at the altar with the grip of a man closing a business deal. Her maid of honor, Tessa Monroe, had squeezed Celeste's fingers right before the doors opened and whispered, "You look like someone who deserves this." Celeste had laughed, which was the wrong thing to do, but it was better than crying. The ceremony lasted 40 minutes. The reception lasted 5 hours. Roman danced with her twice, once when the photographer was watching, and once near the end of the night, when the older guests had gone home and the lighting had turned gold and soft. He had held her, like she was something he intended to keep. She had believed him. At 11:15, Roman kissed her on the cheek near the elevator and told her he needed to speak with one of his attorneys about something that couldn't wait. He said it the way he said everything, smoothly, without hesitation, with just enough eye contact to make the lie feel like truth. Celeste had been with Roman for 2 years before the engagement and 14 months during it. She had learned to read the shape of his sentences. She had never once suspected that the shape was the only real thing about them. She went upstairs alone. She changed out of the dress. She ordered room service she didn't touch. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited, the way she had waited so many other nights, telling herself that a man like Roman Vescari had obligations and complications, and that love sometimes meant learning to sit comfortably with absence. She was good at that. She had been practicing since she was 9 years old. At 12:38, her phone lit up with a notification from a number she didn't recognize. The message had no text, only a photograph. Later, Celeste would try to remember the exact sequence of what she understood and when she understood it. The mind does strange things with unbearable information. It staggers, retreats, tries to locate an exit. What she remembered was the white silk shirt first. She had folded it herself that morning when she was packing Roman's overnight bag because they were supposed to leave for the Maldives the following afternoon, and Roman never packed his own things carefully. She knew that shirt. She knew the particular way the collar sat. She knew the small stain near the second button that the dry cleaner had never fully removed. The shirt was on her sister. Nadia Whitmore was sitting on the edge of an unmade hotel bed with her knees pulled up and her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and she was wearing Roman's shirt, and behind her in the mirror's reflection stood Roman himself, looking down at his left wrist, fastening his watch. The same watch Celeste had clasped for him that morning before the wedding. Her hands were still in her lap when she called Nadia's number. She didn't plan to do it. Her thumb found the contact before her brain decided anything. The way your hand pulls back from fire before pain registers. Nadia answered on the second ring. I wondered how long it would take you. Her voice was not ashamed. It was not even particularly careful. It had the flat, practiced quality of someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times and had long since stopped feeling nervous about it. Tell me this is a mistake, Celeste said. It's not. The room went very quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, the kind that fills up with everything you're not yet ready to say. How long? Celeste said. It came out as a statement, not a question, because some part of her already knew the answer would be long enough to rearrange everything she thought was real. Close to 4 years, Nadia said. 4 years. Celeste had met Roman 5 years ago at a charity dinner her father hosted annually. She had been standing near a window, holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, watching a room full of people pretend to care about a cause they mostly saw as a tax benefit. And Roman had appeared beside her and said, quietly, "You look like the only person in this room who knows exactly where the exits are." And she had laughed, really laughed, because it was both accurate and specific, and accurate specificity was the one thing that always got past her defenses. 4 years ago, she and Roman had been together for approximately 11 months. The birthday, Celeste said slowly. Barcelona, Nadia confirmed. Celeste's 31st birthday. Roman had missed it because of a business complication in Philadelphia. She had spent that evening with Tessa, and they had ordered too much food and watched old films, and Celeste had told herself it was fine. It was one birthday. Relationships required compromise and understanding. Christmas Eve. Aspen. The night my father was in the hospital. There was a brief pause, the first one. That one was my idea, Nadia said. I told him it was important. Something about that, the admission that Nadia had deliberately manufactured the absence on the worst possible night, broke something in Celeste that she hadn't even known was still intact. She had sat in a hospital corridor for 6 hours, waiting on a surgeon's report, calling Roman every 40 minutes, listening to his voicemail, drinking bad coffee from a machine, and telling herself he was probably on a plane, and the service was poor. He had been with her sister. On the night her father might have died, her husband-to-be had been with her sister, and her sister had told him it was important to stay. Why, Celeste said. It was the only word she had left. Nadia was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, the performance quality had dropped slightly. Not into remorse, into something older and harder than remorse. "'Cause you've had everything," she said, "your whole life. The name, the money, the way people look at you when you walk into a room, the way doors open. I've watched it since we were children, and I was always the one standing behind you, and nobody ever." She stopped. Started again differently. "Roman is mine. He has always been mine. You were the arrangement. I'm the choice." Celeste heard the words. She processed them, and then she understood something that had nothing to do with Roman at all. This was not about a man. This had never been about a man. Nadia had spent 20 years resenting a life she believed had been taken from her. The fact that Celeste hadn't taken anything, that the circumstances of birth and the choices of a dead woman named Eleanor Whitmore had simply resulted in different circumstances for both daughters was irrelevant to Nadia's accounting. She had decided long ago who the villain was. She had simply been patient about revenge. "I want you to know something," Nadia said. "He's going to come back to you tonight, and he's going to smell like my perfume, and you are going to smile at him, because that's what you do. You make everything look composed and fine and under control. And I want you to know that every time you look at him from now on, the truth is going to be there, and there is nothing you can do about it." Celeste looked at her wedding ring. The diamond was a family piece, 4 generations old, cleaned and reset on a platinum band that Roman had commissioned from a jeweler in Antwerp. Her grandmother had worn it. Her mother had worn it. Her thumb moved toward the ring, and then she stopped. Because across the room on the glass-topped decks beside the window, Roman's tablet was lit up with an incoming message notification. She had forgotten he'd left it. He rarely left it. The call was still connected. Celeste put the phone down on the bed without ending it and walked to the desk. She would tell herself later that she picked up the tablet simply to turn off the notification, that it was an instinct, not a decision. Maybe that was even true. The first few things she saw seemed ordinary business correspondence, calendar entries, a string of messages with someone she didn't recognize. She almost put it down, but the name in one of the message threads caught her attention. Not a person's name, a company name. A company she was certain she'd never heard of, except that beneath the conversation was an attachment. And the attachment was a signature page, and the signature on it was hers. Celeste sat down. She opened the attachment, then the next one, then the one before it. She stopped counting after the 11th document. Her name was everywhere, on corporate restructuring agreements, on financing applications, on subsidiary formation documents for companies nested inside companies, all ultimately connected to Roman Vescari's real estate and financial holdings. Some of the documents she vaguely remembered enormous stacks of papers Roman's attorneys had walked her through during the engagement, using phrases like routine, restructuring, and estate planning and tax efficiency. She had signed because Roman had been sitting beside her explaining that it was all standard, that his lawyers were thorough, that the Whitmore family's involvement added a layer of legitimacy that protected both of them. She had trusted him. She was on the tablet for nearly 2.5 hours. She stopped only because her eyes were burning and her hands were not entirely steady. Outside the window, Boston was still doing what Boston did in the small hours, cabs moving, lights blinking, the city maintaining its reliable indifference to private catastrophe. On the bed, her phone was still connected to Nadia's number. At some point, Nadia had ended the call. Celeste didn't know when. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into this hotel room 3 hours earlier. The woman who had believed that the difficulty of the past 2 years, the canceled plans and missed occasions and careful distances, had been the ordinary friction of building a life with someone complicated. She had chosen Roman, knowing he was complicated. She had told herself that complicated meant layered, that it meant depth, that a man who ran empires and managed competing obligations was simply not the same as a man who lived simply. She had not understood that complicated, in Roman Vescari's particular case, meant that she was a function, an asset, a row in a spreadsheet. The marriage was not a mistake. It was an acquisition. She was the Whitmore name with a woman attached. By 3 a.m, Celeste had stopped feeling anything that resembled grief. What moved into the space grief vacated was something she didn't have a name for, yet a quality of attention, steady and cold and extremely practical, like the particular clarity that comes after a fever breaks. She thought about her options methodically. She thought about what was reversible and what wasn't. She thought about what she knew and what she could prove and what she needed before she moved. She called Tessa. The phone rang twice before Tessa picked up in the thick, slightly alarmed voice of someone dragged from deep sleep. Celeste? What? I need you to be awake, Celeste said. I'm sorry about the hour. Are you awake? A pause. Then the sound of movement. I'm awake. What happened? It was the same phrasing Celeste had used with Nadia. Not a question. A statement waiting for shape. Roman spent the night with Nadia, Celeste said. It's been going on for 4 years. And that's actually the least of it. She paused. He's been attaching my name to his companies, without my understanding. Significantly. I don't know the full extent yet, but it's... She stopped and looked at the tablet, still open on the desk. It's a problem. Silence on Tessa's end. Then, very carefully, are you safe? Yes. Is he there? No. Okay. Tessa's voice shifted into something efficient and quiet. I'm going to call Evelyn. Evelyn Shaw was an attorney. Not a divorce attorney specifically, but a woman who had spent 30 years navigating the intersection of family wealth and corporate law, which meant she understood how names could be used and how that use could be undone. Celeste had met her twice, once at a function her father hosted, and once at a conference Celeste had attended in her capacity as a Whitmore Foundation board member. She had given Celeste her card both times. Celeste had kept both cards. Tell her I need 48 hours of her time starting tomorrow morning, Celeste said. Tell her I'll explain everything in person. And Tessa. I'm not telling anyone else, Tessa said immediately. I know. They stayed on the phone for another few minutes without speaking much. That was one of the things Celeste valued most about Tessa. She understood that sometimes the most useful thing one human being could offer another was simply the sound of breathing on the other end of a call. Evidence that someone was there, that you had not fallen entirely alone into whatever this was. After she hung up, Celeste opened the desk drawer and found the hotel stationery. She wrote down everything she had seen on the tablet. Every company name, every document title, every date she could remember. Her handwriting was not her normal handwriting. It was smaller and faster, and pressed harder into the paper, the physical evidence of a mind running at a different speed than it was designed for. She gave herself 7 days. 7 days to understand the full architecture of what Roman had done with her identity. 7 days to identify every legal connection and find the mechanism to sever it. 7 days to put herself somewhere safe before Roman understood what she was doing. He would come back in the morning, looking clean and composed, and carrying some variation of the Philadelphia story. She would smile, and the smile would be the most dangerous thing in the room. Roman returned at 7:45. He was freshly showered. She could smell that he had used a hotel-provided shampoo rather than his own, which was the kind of small logistical detail that people in his position learned to manage. He was carrying a coffee tray with 2 cups and a paper bag from the bakery downstairs that she liked. He had the specific manner of a man who had decided that the best defense was a warm offense. "You're already up," he said. "Couldn't sleep well," she said, which was not untrue. He set the coffee down and kissed her on the temple and began unpacking the bakery bag with the domestic ease of a man entirely at peace with himself. He told her about the meeting, Philadelphia, the attorney, the issue that had required immediate attention. He delivered the lie in segments, not all at once, which would have been easier to find holes in, but in the natural conversational rhythm of someone who has simply been awake, dealing with something boring. Celeste asked 2 questions. Both were the kind of questions a trusting wife would ask, practical, mild, inviting further detail. Roman answered them both without hesitation. His lies were the most technically accomplished she had ever encountered, which made sense when she considered that lying, for him, was probably less of an active choice and more of a practiced reflex. He had likely been doing it so long that the truth felt like the effort. She drank her coffee. She watched him eat. She smiled when he caught her looking. And she thought about the attorney she was calling the moment he stepped out of the room. The next 4 days were the most demanding performance of Celeste's life, and she had spent a lifetime performing. She had been performing competence since she was 9 years old, and her mother was gone, sick-celled, and the Whitmore household had reorganized itself around a grief it never properly named. She had performed confidence in boardrooms where men twice her age assumed she was present as decoration. She had performed happiness at charitable events, when the thing she actually felt was a low-grade loneliness she had never found the right person to put language to. This was different. This performance was running alongside a parallel operation she was conducting in secret, simultaneously, in every available gap. She had breakfast with Roman. She took photographs of documents on the tablet while he showered. She had lunch with him and listened to his assessments of their honeymoon plans. She sat in a bathroom stall at a spa they visited and spent 45 minutes on an encrypted call with Evelyn Shaw, who had by then spent 18 hours reviewing what Celeste had described and had things that Celeste needed to hear clearly. "The breadth of this is significant," Evelyn said. Her voice was the particular dry, unhurried quality of a woman who had dealt with significant things for 3 decades and had stopped being surprised by the shapes that human self-interest could take. He structured it carefully. "The documents you sign, most of them, will read as voluntary and informed consent, unless we can demonstrate otherwise, and demonstrating otherwise will require depositions and discovery that take time. But your position isn't without leverage. The Whitmore name was the mechanism. Without your ongoing participation, and without the family association, several of these structures lose their anchoring." "What does that mean practically?" Celeste said. "It means that if you formally revoke your board positions, file resignations from the subsidiaries you can identify, and give me the documentation you've photographed, we can begin dismantling the scaffolding." A pause. "It won't be instantaneous, and it will alert him." "Not yet," Celeste said. "I need a few more days. I'll have the resignation documents drafted by Thursday morning." On Wednesday, Celeste found a second prepaid phone. She bought it at a drugstore she stopped at on a walk she told Roman was about fresh air. She registered it to an address that didn't correspond to any property associated with the Whitmore family. She set up a new email account under a name that meant nothing to anyone. She made a list of what she needed to move, what she needed to copy, what she needed to leave. A hidden suitcase, gradually filled. A passport she transferred from her handbag to the lining she had sewn herself the previous autumn for reasons she hadn't understood at the time. A bank contact she had known for 12 years and trusted enough to call on an unscheduled basis about an account restructure. On Thursday morning, while Roman was in a meeting in the hotel lobby that he'd mentioned the night before, she sat down and signed every resignation document Evelyn had prepared. Her hand was steady. She was surprised by that. She had expected her hand to shake. Instead, she wrote her name with exactly the controlled, deliberate pressure her grandmother had once told her was the mark of a person who knew what they were deciding. Your signature is your intention made physical, her grandmother had said. She had been talking about a birthday card at the time. Celeste suspected the principal scaled. She was coming back from an errand, a real one, a stop at a boutique on Newbury Street, to pick up a piece she'd ordered before the wedding when she stepped out of the elevator on the 14th floor and nearly walked into Gideon Rusk. Gideon was Roman's operational lieutenant. He had Roman's trust in the way that very few people had Roman's trust, not because Roman was generous with it, but because Gideon had demonstrated over many years that he understood where the lines were and didn't cross them. He was a quiet, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s who communicated mostly in short sentences and long looks, and who had been unfailingly courteous to Celeste in the particular way that people who work for someone powerful are courteous to that person's wife. Carefully, with a slight quality of appraisal underneath. He stopped when he saw her. Mrs. Vescari, he said. He'd been calling her that since the wedding. Gideon. She kept walking, because stopping would have been the wrong move. I need a moment, he said. She stopped. He did not look at her the way he usually looked at her. The appraisal was gone. What placed was something more specific, something directed. There are some paperwork anomalies that were flagged this morning, he said. Quietly, resignations, filed with several of the subsidiary boards. Celeste said nothing. Roman doesn't know yet, Gideon said. The sentence landed like a stone into still water. He wasn't threatening her. He was informing her. Whether those were meaningfully different things was a question she didn't have time to resolve. I appreciate you telling me, she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and moved past her toward the elevator. She kept her pace entirely normal until she turned the corner. Then she sent 3 messages in rapid succession to Evelyn, to Tessa, and to the bank contact, and changed the plan from 72 remaining hours to something closer to 5. She moved. The bank vault contents were transferred via instructions she issued that afternoon. Legal evidence was packaged and sealed with Evelyn's office. Revocations were filed in jurisdictions that didn't require Roman's signature. Her personal phone with Nadia's call still in the received log, with the photograph she'd taken of the tablet, with the conversation records, was preserved with Evelyn's office under a formal retention order. The second escape route replaced the first. That evening, Roman told her he was going to Philadelphia. He said it over dinner, the same dinner table, where he'd told her the previous Philadelphia story, with the same smooth timings and the same light in his eyes that meant he had already planned the shape of the lie in advance. He said there was a property negotiation that needed his physical presence. He would be back Sunday. He was sorry about the honeymoon delay. Celeste looked at him across the table. She had spent 4 days performing the role of a woman who did not know. She would need to perform it for approximately 12 more hours. Of course, she said. I understand. He reached across and squeezed her hand. His thumb traced her knuckles. She did not flinch, which she considered a genuine accomplishment. He left at 8 the next morning. He kissed her goodbye in the corridor, outside the suite. He told her he'd call when he landed. He got into the elevator. The doors closed. Celeste stood in the corridor for exactly 4 seconds. Then she went back inside and did what she had spent a week preparing to do. 5 hours later, the suite was exactly as clean as it had been on their wedding night. Rose petals still in the disposal. Champagne still unopened on the sideboard, she hadn't touched it. The bed was made with hotel precision. Nothing was missing, except everything that had ever actually belonged to Celeste. And one addition. On the nightstand, beside the lamp, she placed a small card. White, plain, no hotel letterhead. She had written 4 words. She wrote them not in the careful pressure of her grandmother's signature lesson, but in her ordinary hand, the one that was slightly cramped and ran uphill when she was tired. I know. Good luck. She placed her wedding ring on top of the card. Then she walked to the service corridor at the far end of the 14th floor, took the stairs to the 3rd level, crossed the hotel through the back of house, past kitchen staff and laundry carts, and a maintenance worker who looked up once and then looked back down at his work and exited through the loading dock into the gray Boston morning. Nobody stopped her. Nobody saw a Whitmore heiress vanishing. They saw a woman in ordinary clothes walking through a back door into a city that was already moving and had no particular interest in her direction. She did not look back. She didn't need to. When Roman's phone lit up 3 hours later mid-afternoon, somewhere between Boston and what she now understood it was a seaside resort where he and Nadia had planned a weekend. It was a message from Gideon. She is gone. Everything is gone. Call me now. Roman was back in Boston by nightfall. The suite was exactly as she had left it. He read the card twice. He picked up the wedding ring. He stood there for a long time. And in that moment, for possibly the first time in the history of their relationship, Roman Vescari had absolutely no idea what came next. Roman Vescari was not a man who panicked. He had built an empire on the specific ability to remain functional when everyone around him was falling apart. He had sat across tables from men who intended to destroy him and eaten his meal without losing his appetite. He had taken phone calls delivering catastrophic news and responded in the same tone he used to order coffee. This was not bravery. It was engineering a particular architecture of self-control that he had constructed over 20 years because the alternative in his world was being read. And being read meant being targeted. He stood in the bridal suite for 6 minutes after reading the card. 4 words. He turned the wedding ring over in his palm. The diamond caught the afternoon light coming through the window and threw a small bright shape against the far wall. He watched it for a moment, then closed his fingers around the ring and put it in his jacket pocket. Gideon, he said. Gideon Rusk was already in the doorway. He had been there since Roman arrived, standing with the specific stillness of a man who has delivered bad news and is now waiting to hear what gets built from the wreckage. How long ago, Roman said. Hotel staff put it at around 1 in the afternoon. Service corridor, 3rd floor exit through the loading dock. No cameras covering the dock at that angle. She knew that. Yes, who helped her, working on it? Gideon paused. The resignations went to 7 boards, filed with the registrar's office in Massachusetts, Delaware, and the Cayman structure. All time-stamped before noon. Romans set the card back on the nightstand. He looked at it for a moment, then looked away. She had an attorney. Almost certainly. The filings are too clean for someone working alone in a week. Evelyn Shaw, Roman said. Gideon's said nothing, which was confirmation. Roman walked to the window. Boston spread out below him, entirely indifferent. He had stood at this exact window 2 nights ago with a glass of scotch, feeling like a man who had arranged his life precisely the way he intended. The distance between that man and this one was 48 hours and 4 words written on a hotel notacard. Find her, he said. We're looking. Look harder. Gideon left. Roman stood at the window for another few minutes, and then he did something he almost never did in spaces where there was any possibility of being observed. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed that still smelled faintly of Celeste's perfume, and he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and stayed there. Not grief, not yet. Something more primitive than grief, the sensation of having miscalculated so badly that the entire framework of your assumptions has to be rebuilt from nothing, and the rebuilding has to happen right now, and you don't yet have the materials. He had believed Celeste was manageable. That was the word he would have used privately, to himself, in his own unguarded accounting. Not because he thought her weak, he had never thought her weak, but because he had believed that love, in women like Celeste, operated as a kind of gravity. That it pulled everything toward it and kept it orbiting. that the Whitmore girls, raised on quiet wealth and quieter grief, were trained from childhood to hold things together even when the things were wrong. He had been right about the training. He had been catastrophically wrong about what it meant. She had held it together. She had held it together long enough to dismantle everything he'd built around her name, and then she had walked out through a loading dock and disappeared into a city of 700,000 people. And she had done it in a week, while smiling at him over breakfast. He took his hand out of his pocket and looked at the wedding ring again. The woman he had married was not who he had thought he was marrying. He was not sure whether that made him feel worse, or, in some terrible way he wasn't prepared to examine, something closer to recognition. He called Nadia. She answered on the fourth ring, which meant she had looked at the name on the screen and decided how she wanted to approach the conversation before picking up. "She's gone," Roman said, before Nadia had finished saying hello. A brief silence, then "Good." "Do not," Roman said, "say that again." "Roman, she has filed resignations from every subsidiary board. 7 structures, multiple jurisdictions. She has documentation of the tablet content and a retained attorney, and I have every reason to believe she is preparing to cooperate with financial regulators if we make any attempt to use her name going forward." He stopped. His voice had the quality of someone holding a door closed against wind. "So no, not good." Nadia's silence this time was different. Longer. When she spoke, something had shifted beneath the surface confidence. She was supposed to just leave. She did leave. That was the problem. Roman stood up. "I need you to understand something. Whatever you thought was going to happen after she found out the version of events you planned in your head, none of it is what happened. What happened is that she found out, and then she spent a week building a case while I stood in the same room and couldn't see it. So what do you need me to do?" "Nothing," Roman said. "That's the point. There is nothing to do. The only move we have is to wait and be very careful not to give her anything else." He ended the call. Nadia sat with the disconnected call for a moment, and then set her phone on the table beside her. She was in the hotel room where the photograph had been taken. She had stayed on another day because leaving felt like admitting something, though she wasn't sure what. She looked at the bed, at the mirror behind it. She thought about how many times she had imagined this outcome. Over the past 4 years, Celeste finding out, Celeste leaving, the field finally clearing, and how many times the imagined version had felt like relief. This did not feel like relief. She opened her phone again and looked at the contact for Celeste. Last called 2 days ago. Duration 23 minutes. Nadia stared at the number for a long time. Then she put the phone face down on the table and went to pour herself a drink. Celeste was in Providence. Not because Providence was the destination, but because it was the first place the logic of distance had suggested when she'd mapped out her initial movement. She had a contact there, a woman named Margot, who had been her mother's college roommate and who had maintained a quiet, consistent warmth toward Celeste for 3 decades without ever asking anything in return. Margot was the kind of person who opened doors and didn't ask questions in the same gesture. Celeste had called her from the prepaid phone 2 days before the wedding, not to explain anything, but simply to establish that the door was available if she needed it. She had needed it. Margot's house was a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood with a garden that got too much sun in the back and not enough in the front, and it smelled like old wood and lemon soap and the particular combination of quiet and purposefulness that defined people who had lived long enough to stop performing. Margot fed Celeste dinner without asking what had happened, put clean towels in the guest bathroom, and went to bed at 9:30. Celeste sat at the kitchen table until midnight. She had her list. The list she'd written on hotel stationery the night she'd found the tablet company names, document titles, dates. She spread it out and added to it everything she had photographed, everything Evelyn had described, everything she'd been able to verify in the days since. It filled 3 sheets of paper. She read it from top to bottom twice, and then she sat with the empty feeling that follows when you have been running hard for a week, and the running has stopped, and your body hasn't caught up yet to the fact that you can now be still. Her phone, the real one, which she'd surrendered to Evelyn's office under retention, had been replaced with the prepaid. There were only 4 numbers in it: Tessa, Evelyn, Margot, and one other. A number belonging to her doctor's office that had called her 17 times over the past 3 weeks. She had not returned those calls. She looked at the number now. Then she set the phone down. There was already too much. She told herself that. She said it quietly in the kitchen of a woman she barely knew, in a city where nobody was looking for her yet, with the list of her own name being used without her knowledge spread across a stranger's table. There was already too much. She would call the doctor when there was less. She did not call the doctor that night. Tessa arrived in Providence on Saturday. She drove herself, which meant she had told nobody where she was going, and she brought a bag that was too large for a one-night visit and too small to be permanent, which meant she had packed for the amount of time it would take to get a clearer picture of what was needed. She had known Celeste for 17 years. She had developed a reasonably accurate internal model of what Celeste required at various stress levels. What she found when Margot opened the door and let her through to the kitchen was a version of Celeste she had seen only once before at the funeral, 13 years ago, when Eleanor Whitmore was put in the ground, and Celeste had stood at the graveside with the precise, locked quality of a person who has decided that feeling things publicly is a form of losing. "You look terrible," Tessa said, sitting down. "Thank you," Celeste said. "Coffee, please." Tessa studied her. "Have you slept?" "Some. Have you eaten?" "Margot cooked." "That's not what I asked." Tessa accepted the coffee mug. "Has Evelyn heard anything from Roman's people?" "Indirect communication." His attorneys made contact Thursday afternoon, a very careful set of inquiries about the resignations, framed as administrative questions. Evelyn responded with a very careful set of answers that basically amounted to, your client's name is being removed from your client's structures, and any interference with that process will result in a formal disclosure to the relevant regulatory bodies. Celeste sat down across from her. Roman didn't follow up, because he understood the message, because he's smart enough to understand when a position has already passed. She wrapped both hands around her mug. His empire doesn't collapse. It's too distributed and too well constructed for one person's resignation to bring the whole thing down. But it shrinks. Several of the financing arrangements required the Whitmore Association as a condition. Those lenders are already asking questions. Auditors have been requested by 2 of the partners. She paused. He'll survive it. He's just smaller than he was. Tessa watched her carefully. And you? Celeste looked at the table. I don't know yet, she said, which was the most honest thing she'd said out loud in 10 days. Tessa reached across and put her hand over Celeste's. She didn't say anything else. She understood, as very few people understood about Celeste Whitmore, that the composure wasn't coldness. It was a structure built over a very real and very tender interior. And the structure required a certain kind of maintenance. And right now, the maintenance was all happening in secret, in the small hours, in borrowed kitchens, where nobody was watching. They sat there for a long time. In Boston, Roman's empire underwent its first significant contraction in 11 years. Gideon managed the communications. Roman sat in his office at the top of a building in the financial district and made calls and gave instructions, and did what he had always done. He kept the machine running. But there was a quality to the days that was different now. A friction. The Vescari name alone was not what the Whitmore name had been in certain rooms. He had understood that intellectually for years. He had used it accordingly. But understanding a tool's value and suddenly not having it were 2 different experiences, and the difference was felt everywhere. On Monday, a lender in New York requested a review meeting. On Tuesday, one of the subsidiary boards now operating without Celeste's proxy voted to delay a major acquisition pending structural clarification. On Wednesday, Gideon came into Roman's office and closed the door. Paris, he said. Roman looked up. She used her passport. Exit recorded Friday evening. She's in Europe. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, which city? Don't know yet. The passport record is Paris, but she could have transferred anywhere after. Roman looked out the window. She knows we'd look in Paris. She's not in Paris. Probably not, Gideon agreed. Keep looking. Gideon didn't move immediately. Roman noticed. What? Roman said. The attorney's office contacted me this morning. Not Evelyn Shaw, directly a junior associate. He paused. They want us to understand that if our search efforts move beyond standard investigative resources, if they become intrusive or threatening in any way toward Mrs. Vescari, the disclosure goes out that day. Roman looked at him. She thought of that too, Gideon said. Roman said nothing. She documented everything before she left. The tablet content, the filings, the signature authorizations. All of it retained under attorney-client privilege and set up on a conditional release. Gideon folded his hands in front of him. She basically built a dead man's switch before she walked out. The silence in the office had a specific quality that Gideon had learned to read over many years. This was not the silence before a decision. It was the silence of a man recalibrating something fundamental, adjusting his understanding of a situation he thought he'd already fully understood. "Find her," Roman said, quietly. "No contact. Just find her." Nadia returned to Boston on a Thursday. She told herself it was because she had business at the Whitmore Foundation, where she sat on 2 committees and held a position that had been created for her by a board that understood, without anyone ever saying it directly, that Nadia Whitmore's relationship to the family name required some form of institutional accommodation. The foundation was the place where the difficult parts of the Whitmore family were processed into something presentable. She had her own office there, small but with a good window. She sat in it on Thursday afternoon and looked at her inbox and thought about Celeste. Not with guilt. She had examined that possibility carefully over the past week and had determined, with the kind of thorough, rigorous self-examination that produces predetermined results, that guilt was not the correct response. Celeste had grown up inside a life that Nadia had watched from the outside. Celeste's name opened things. Celeste's face was on the wall of the family foundation lobby, in a portrait commissioned when she turned 30, painted by an artist whose work sold for significant sums, depicting a woman in a blue dress, looking slightly to the left of the viewer, with an expression that managed to be both composed and warm. Nadia had walked past that portrait every day for 2 years. There was no portrait of Nadia. This was what she told herself. She was reading through an email thread when her assistant knocked and opened the door without waiting for response, which was unusual enough that Nadia looked up immediately. "There's a man here," the assistant said. Her tone had a careful quality. "Who?" "He says his name is Gideon Rusk. He doesn't have an appointment." Nadia set down her pen. "Send him in," she said. Gideon entered the office the way he entered every room, without hurry and without announcement, as if he had already assessed it before he stepped through the door. He looked at Nadia the way she imagined. He looked at most things, with a flat, functional attention that was gathering data rather than forming impressions. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Rusk." She did not stand. "This is unexpected. I'll be brief." He didn't sit either. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and his weight evenly distributed, the posture of a man who was comfortable having this conversation standing in a doorway. "We're working on locating your sister. There's information that might assist us communication she made in the days before the wedding, contacts she called, locations she might have planned in advance. If you have any knowledge of her movements or intentions." "I don't," Nadia said. Gideon studied her. "We were not in contact about anything except the obvious," she said. "Whatever she planned without telling me." "You spoke for 23 minutes on her wedding night." Nadia met his eyes. She confronted me. I told her the truth. I did not give her an itinerary. Something moved in Gideon's expression, not quite skepticism and not quite acceptance. He held her gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. "If you remember anything," he said, and he placed a card on the edge of her desk, "Roman would appreciate a call." He left. Nadia looked at the card. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked it up and held it between her fingers and thought about the last thing Celeste had said to her before the phone went quiet that night. Celeste hadn't said anything. That was the thing Nadia had been trying not to think about. Celeste had gone silent, not hung up, just gone quiet, and in that silence there was something Nadia could not interpret, and the inability to interpret it was the one thing that had been following her all week, like a sound she couldn't locate. Celeste's silences had always meant something. Growing up, Celeste's anger had not been loud. It had been a withdrawal, a careful removal of warmth from the room, so precise and complete that you didn't notice. It was gone until you were cold. Nadia had grown up cold, largely. She had concluded that Celeste's warmth was simply naturally exclusive, that certain people were in and others were not, and that she was not. She had built a life's worth of resentment from that conclusion. It had not occurred to her until this moment, sitting in her small, windowed office with Gideon Drusk's business card in her hand, to question whether the conclusion had been accurate. She put the card in her drawer. She didn't call. 6 months passed. Celeste moved from Margot's house in Providence to a sublet apartment in Montreal that she found through a contact of Evelyn's, then to a rented house in the south of France that cost more than she'd planned but had a garden that got the right light and a landlord who asked no questions. She worked remotely on a consulting contract she had arranged before the wedding, an architectural preservation consultancy that dealt with historic properties and required primarily her expertise and occasionally her name, and she had negotiated the use of her name carefully. She called her doctor in November. She was in the south of France when she made the call. It was morning. The garden was full of a particular thin winter light that came off the Mediterranean and had no warmth in it, but was extremely clear, the kind of light that showed you everything without softening any of it. The nurse put her through. "Miss Whitmore," the doctor said. "I've been trying to reach you, I know," Celeste said. "I'm sorry. There were complications. I need you to come in." "I can't come in. I'm not in the country. Tell me on the phone." A pause. "The blood panels we ran before your wedding indicated some hormone levels we wanted to follow up on. Specifically a breath. Miss Whitmore, there's a possibility you were already pregnant when we ran the initial panel. The levels were consistent with very early pregnancy, 3 to 4 weeks. I've been trying to reach you because at this point." Celeste stopped hearing the rest of the sentence. She was sitting at a small wooden table in the kitchen of a rented French house with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, and the thin Mediterranean light coming through the window. And the world rearranged itself around her with the same quiet violence it had rearranged itself 6 months ago in a Boston hotel room. She did the math without intending to. 3 to 4 weeks before the wedding. The blood panel had been in September. If she was 3 to 4 weeks then. "How far along?" she said. "Based on the September panel, approximately 5 to 6 weeks now. But you'd need to confirm with a local provider. 5 to 6 weeks." She sat with that for a long time after the call ended. She sat in the kitchen with the cold tea and the thin light, and she thought about Roman's number, which was still in her original phone, which was still in Evelyn's office under retention, which she had not accessed in 6 months. She thought about calling. She sat with that thought the way you sit with something heavy, not setting it down, just feeling its weight, letting yourself understand exactly what it costs to carry it before deciding whether to put it down or keep going. She thought about the man who had held her after nightmares. She thought about the man who had kissed her temple while carrying a lie about Philadelphia. She thought about 4 words on a hotel notacard, not hers. His. Not a goodbye, a contract. She had been a function. An asset, a signature on a page. And somewhere inside that same man, apparently, was someone capable of dancing with her in golden light and making it feel completely real, and she had never been able to reconcile those two things, and she did not reconcile them now. She deleted his number from the prepaid phone. She had never added it there to begin with. She deleted it from the place in her mind where it had been living without permission. Then she went to find a local doctor. And 5 weeks after that, in a private clinic in Florence, where she had moved by then, and where nobody knew the name Vescari, she gave birth to a boy with dark eyes and a small, precise mouth, and a quality of attention, even in the first hours, that was startlingly focused for something so new. She named him Miles. Miles Whitmore. She looked at him in the strange lit quiet of the delivery room, and she thought, "You are going to know exactly who you are, and it is going to come from me, and it is going to be enough." She held him. He was warm and heavy and entirely real in the way that very few things she'd encountered in the past year had been. She held him and did not think about Roman. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight there was only this, a room in Florence, a child with his father's eyes, and a woman who had stopped disappearing and started deciding what she was building instead. And that was already more than she had believed was possible 6 months ago, in a bridal suite in Spossen, with a photograph on her phone and a world collapsing in perfect silence around her. Miles blinked. Celeste pressed her lips to his forehead. Outside, Florence was doing what Florence had done for 800 years, standing in the dark, permanent and unbothered, full of old things that had survived worse than this. 3 years from now, a phone call would find her here. And everything she had built in those 3 years would be tested against something older and darker than Roman Vescari had ever been. But that was 3 years from now. Tonight, Miles Whitmore opened his eyes for the first time and looked at the only person in the room, and Celeste looked back, and neither of them had anywhere else to be. 3 years is enough time to build something real. Celeste had learned that in Florence the way she had learned most important things in her adult life, not from instruction, but from accumulation. From the particular weight of repetition. From 3 years of mornings that began the same way. Miles waking before 6, always, with the specific cheerful urgency of a child who experienced sleep as an interruption of more interesting business. Pulling himself upright in his small bed in the room with the yellow curtain, calling for her in Italian, because the woman downstairs spoke Italian and the woman at the market spoke Italian. And Miles, at 2 years old, had decided, with the calm democratic logic of the very young, that Italian was simply what language was. Mamas, sono qui, she would say. I'm here, she meant it every time. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building, on a narrow street in the Oltrarno neighborhood, across the river from the tourist Florence, in the part of the city where people actually lived, where the laundry crossed between windows and the bakery opened at 5:30, and the old man on the ground floor kept a cat named after a pope and never once asked Celeste where she was from or what she was doing there. The Florentines had a long history, with people who arrived carrying things they didn't talk about. The city had learned to be incurious. She worked for a preservation consultancy, with offices in Geneva and Rome. Her job was to assess historic structures, their integrity, their provenance, their requirements for restoration, and to write reports that became the basis for decisions that involved significant amounts of money and sometimes the attention of cultural authorities. It was meticulous work that required knowing how to read the age of a thing from the marks it had accumulated. She was good at it. She had been good at it before the wedding, in her capacity as a Whitmore Foundation board member, overseeing the Historic Preservation Grant Program, and she was better at it now because she had nothing else demanding her attention, except Miles. And the combination of precise professional focus and complete personal clarity produced, it turned out, excellent work. She had clients who knew her name and trusted her assessments. She had a pediatrician who called Miles Ulcerio Bambino, because he had, since approximately 14 months, regarded the world with a focused, appraising attention that made adults feel they were being evaluated. She had a neighbor named Julia who watched Miles on the 3 afternoons per week that Celeste went to sites and who had appointed herself something between a friend and an aunt without ever announcing the appointment. She had a life. It was quiet. It was hers. She did not think about Roman every day. That had been the work of the first year, learning not to think about him every day, which was harder than she'd anticipated. Not because she missed him specifically, but because he had been woven into the texture of her assumptions about the future. And pulling those threads out one by one left a kind of rawness that had taken time to close over. By the 2nd year, she thought about him occasionally, prompted by something specific, a news item about the Boston real estate market, a particular quality of silence in an empty room, Miles doing something with his hands that looked like nobody she knew. By the 3rd year, she thought about him, the way you think about a scar, aware of it when something makes contact, otherwise simply part of the landscape. Miles was 2 years and 4 months old on the Tuesday in March when her phone rang. She was at the kitchen table. Miles was in the other room conducting a complex operation involving a wooden train set and a significant amount of commentary directed at no one in particular. The call came from a number she didn't recognize, a Massachusetts area code that had no contact entry in her phone. She almost didn't answer. Later she would think about that. about how close she came to letting it ring through. "Miss Whitmore," the voice said. Male, older, carrying the particular tiredness of someone who has been doing one specific thing for a very long time. "My name is Caleb Harlan. I'm a retired investigator out of Massachusetts. I apologize for contacting you this way. I got this number through an attorney named Evelyn Shaw, who was kind enough to pass it along after I explained what I needed." Celeste was already standing. She had moved to the doorway to check on Miles without being fully aware she'd done it. He was in the middle of an elaborate track construction, frowning at a junction that wasn't cooperating. "What do you need?" she said. "I need to talk to you about your mother." The kitchen had a window that faced the narrow street. She could see a man walking a bicycle and a woman carrying grocery bags and the cat from downstairs sitting on a step with the proprietary quality of a thing that has decided its location is permanent. The ordinary world doing ordinary things. "My mother has been dead for 13 years, Celeste said. "Yes, ma'am. That's what I need to talk to you about." Caleb Harlan had retired from the Massachusetts State Police 7 years earlier, after 31 years in which he had worked, in his final decade, primarily on cold case review. He was 64. He had the kind of voice that sounded like it had been worn, in gradually, like good leather. And when he spoke, there was a considered quality to it, the voice of someone who had learned that the most important information usually came after you stopped talking. He had been asked to look at the Eleanor Whitmore accident by a colleague who'd encountered something in a different case. Not asked officially, he was retired, with no institutional authority, doing what retired investigators sometimes did when they couldn't locate the part of themselves that has agreed to stop. He described this without self-consciousness, as a plain fact. Eleanor Whitmore had died 13 years ago in a highway accident in western Massachusetts. Her car had left the road on a curve that was known to be poorly lit on a night in November when the road surface was borderline icy. The accident investigation had concluded mechanical failure, a brake system fault, compounded by road conditions. The case had been closed within 3 months. Caleb had reopened the questions, informally, after a man named Silas Crane had said certain things to a palliative care nurse at a hospice facility in western Massachusetts. The nurse had recorded the conversation because she wasn't sure what to do with it, and she wanted to be able to accurately report what she'd heard if the time came. The time had come when Silas Crane's condition changed, and it became clear that the window for any formal accounting was measured in weeks rather than months. "What did he say?" Celeste said. "He said he wasn't paid to stage an accident. To make a murder look like mechanical failure on a known problem road in poor conditions." Caleb paused. He said the target was Eleanor Whitmore. Miles had moved to a new section of track in the other room. She could hear him speaking to the trains in the low instructional tone he used when he was teaching them things. "Who paid him?" Celeste said. He gave 2 names. Another pause, not dramatic, just careful. The pause of someone organizing what they're about to say with the awareness that it cannot be unsaid. The primary, the one who initiated and financed the arrangement, was a woman named Lenora Whitmore. Celeste's stepmother, the woman her father had married when Celeste was 12. The woman who had attended Eleanor's funeral in a black dress and placed one hand on Celeste's shoulder at the graveside and said, quietly, "She would want you to be strong." The woman who had managed the Whitmore Foundation's charitable programs for a decade and who sent cards on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, every year, without fail. He said there was a second name. Celeste said, "Yes." "Tell me," Caleb told her. She stood in the kitchen of her Florence apartment for a long time after the call ended. Miles had abandoned the trains and was now at the doorway, looking at her with the focused, assessing quality that sometimes made her want to laugh and sometimes made her chest hurt because of whose eyes they were. "Mama Tristy," he asked. "Is Mama sad?" She crouched to his level. She looked at him, carefully, the way she always looked at him when she needed to remind herself of the concrete physical reality of things. "No, Bambino," she said. "Mama sta pensando, Mama is thinking." He considered this. Then he took her hand and led her back to the trains, which was his solution to most problems, and she sat on the floor and held a piece of curved track and thought about the name that Caleb Harlan had said in that steady, worn leather voice. The second name, Nadia. She booked a flight 4 days later. She did not tell Tessa in advance. She did not contact Evelyn until she was already at the airport. She arranged for Julia to take Miles for a week, and she sat on the floor of the apartment and watched him sleep with the particular intentional attention of someone making a record they intend to carry. He slept on his side. He had Roman's dark hair and her grandmother's mouth, and his own specific way of sleeping with one fist pressed against his cheek, as if even unconscious he was thinking about something. She left for Boston on a Thursday morning. She did not take a low-profile arrival. She did not use a secondary name or an indirect route. She booked a direct flight from Florence to Boston under her full legal name, and she cleared customs at Logan with her Whitmore passport. And she was aware as she did it that somewhere in the machinery of whoever was still looking for her, a notification would eventually surface. Let it. She signed her name on the customs declaration form with the controlled, deliberate pressure her grandmother had taught her. Celeste Whitmore, not Vescari, never had been. The Whitmore family attorney received her at his office on a Friday morning and spent 45 minutes telling her, carefully, what her absence had and had not changed about her standing. It had changed nothing legally. She was still a Whitmore in every sense that mattered to the family trust, the foundation board, and the estate documents. She had not been removed because she could not be removed without her own consent, and she had not given consent. She had simply not been present. Your father has been asking about you, the attorney said. I'll contact him, she said. She had not spoken to her father in 3 years. The reasons were tangled, he had known, she thought. Something. Not about Lenora's specific actions, but something. He had a quality, her father, of knowing the shape of a room without examining the contents, of asking slightly fewer questions than were warranted in situations that might have uncomfortable answers. It was a particular kind of useful blindness that very wealthy people sometimes developed because it made the management of complicated circumstances more comfortable. She was not yet ready to have that conversation. On Saturday morning, Celeste walked into the attorney's office building for the meeting with Caleb Harlan. He was smaller than his voice, a lean man in a gray jacket that had been worn correctly rather than well, with the steady hands and direct eye contact of someone who had spent decades in rooms where dishonesty was the baseline condition. He shook her hand once and sat down without preamble. Thank you for coming, he said. Tell me everything, she said. He told her. Silas Crane had been, for 20 years, a private contractor who did work that required no official record. Not a criminal in the organized sense, not affiliated with any of the established organizations that Celeste's experience in the past 3 years had made her more familiar with than she'd ever intended. He was a technical specialist. He knew how to make mechanical failures happen. He knew how to select locations. He knew how to ensure that an accident investigation arrived at the conclusion it was meant to arrive at. He had been hired once before the Whitmore job and twice afterward. The Whitmore job was, by his account, the one he had returned to in the hospice bed, the one that had, in the particular vocabulary of men who do terrible things and then age into clarity about them, sat on his chest. Lenora Whitmore had approached Silas through an intermediary in the autumn before Eleanor died. The reason, as Silas understood it, was money. Eleanor had discovered a discrepancy in the family trust accounts, not an accidental discrepancy, but a systematic one. Money had been moving through shell structures for years. Lenora had been diverting funds not enormous amounts in any single transaction, but consistent and cumulative, over a period of 8 or 9 years, into accounts that were outside the trust's visibility. Eleanor had hired her own accountant. The accountant had found things. Eleanor had informed Lenora that she intended to bring the matter to the trust's independent oversight board and, if necessary, to legal authorities. Lenora had made a different decision. There's a second element, Caleb said. Nadia Celeste said. Yes, he looked at her steadily. According to Silas, the information about your mother's route that night, the specific route she would be taking, which had been changed from her usual path because of a family logistics issue, was provided by someone inside the household. Someone who had access to the family's schedule and had reason to want this particular person informed. Celeste looked at the wall. He says as he was given the route information through the same intermediary. The intermediary later told him, without being asked, that the information had come from Eleanor's stepdaughter. Nadia was 19, Celeste said. Yes. Did she know what she was giving the route information for? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Silas doesn't know. He only knows what he received and from whom it was routed. He doesn't know what Nadia understood about how the information would be used. Celeste thought about this. She thought about a 19-year-old girl who had spent her life resenting a woman who was not her mother, who had been told various things about that woman by a stepmother with significant reasons to reframe Eleanor's identity. She thought about Lenora's particular skill, which Celeste had observed over 20 years without ever naming clearly, of making people feel that the version of reality she offered them was the only logical one, of making you believe you had arrived at conclusions independently when you had been carefully directed there. She thought about whether it was possible to be a participant in something without understanding you were a participant. She thought about 19 years old. There's a third element, Caleb said. She looked at him. Your mother left a message. The night before the accident. She called your father's office, his private line, not his assistant. He was traveling. The message was recorded by the answering service. It was a summary of what she had found, what she intended to do, and a specific request that your father contact the oversight board before the end of that week. Caleb opened a folder. The message was deleted before your father could retrieve it. The deletion was traced to a call placed from a number registered to the household account. He paused. Nadia's phone. The room was extremely quiet. Celeste's hands were in her lap. She was not shaking. She noticed this with a distant, almost clinical interest. She was not shaking, and her breathing was even, and the quality of what she was feeling was not like grief and not like rage and not entirely like either of those things. It was something older. Something that had been waiting in the basement of her understanding for 13 years, unnamed, knocking. She had always thought the accident felt wrong. She had thought it in the immediate days after Eleanor died, in the confused and devastating hours when you think all sorts of things, because the mind runs in every direction, looking for an exit from the unbearable. She had filed it with the other things the mind produced in those circumstances, not reliable, not meaningful, just the noise of trauma. She had never returned to the thought. She returned to it now. Silas is willing to make a formal statement, Caleb said. He's already provided a preliminary account, on record with a notary. His condition is, he paused delicately, there is a limited window. Weeks, not months. I want to meet him, Celeste said. I anticipated that. He's at a hospice facility in Northampton. He knows you might come. Celeste stood. She was aware of her own body in the particular heightened way you become aware of it, when something large has shifted underneath the ordinary surface of things, the weight of her feet on the floor, the pressure of her own breath, the temperature of the room. One more question, she said. Caleb looked at her. Does my father know? About Lenora. Caleb's expression shifted slightly. Not into discomfort exactly, but into the particular careful neutrality of a man who is navigating what is true versus what can be proved. I believe, he said slowly, that your father is a man who has spent many years not asking certain questions. Celeste absorbed this. Thank you, she said and walked out. Roman's office received the notification sim before Roman did. The system that Gideon had maintained quietly, consistently for 3 years, was set to flag any use of the name Celeste Whitmore in a verifiable public record context. Passport clearance at Logan Airport. Friday, 8:42 in the morning. Gideon came into Roman's office without knocking. Roman was on a call. Gideon set a printed page on the desk in front of him and tapped it once with one finger. Roman looked at the page. He ended the call without finishing the sentence. Alone, he said, yes, direct flight from Florence. Florence. He had been wrong about Paris. He filed this without particular emotion. It was the kind of error that mattered when it was being made, and was simply information afterward. She had been in Italy, 3 years in Italy, and he had been looking at Paris and Madrid and Zurich. He had been looking at the wrong cities. Has she made contact with anyone? Her father's attorney's office, Friday. Caleb Harlan, Saturday. Who is Caleb Harlan? Gideon produced another page. Retired Massachusetts State Police. Cold case background. He's been quietly reopening questions around a 13-year-old death in the Whitmore family. Roman was still. Eleanor Whitmore. Yes. Something moved across Roman's face that was not quite readable, not the operational assessment he applied to most information, but something more personal and more complicated. He had known about the accident in the way you knew the basic biographical facts about a family you had chosen to attach yourself to. He had never looked further than the surface. He thought about Nadia. Does she know Caleb Harlan spoke to Nadia? Roman said. Unknown. Find out. He stood and find out where she's staying. She's not hiding, Gideon said. She signed her full name at customs. She used her Whitmore identification at the attorney's office. She's not using a prepaid. She is not, he paused. She's not operating like someone who came back to disappear again. Roman absorbed this. No, he said quietly, she's not. He went to the window. The Boston skyline on a March morning gray, and specific and entirely itself. He had stood at this window 3 years ago, looking down at a city that had just swallowed the woman he had spent 6 months looking for. He remembered the particular quality of that frustration, not the clean burning kind, but the duller, heavier kind, the kind that sits in the chest and makes ordinary things feel slightly tilted. He had told himself eventually that she was gone, because she had chosen to be gone. That the search was a form of disrespect to that choice. That stopping the search was, of all the things he could offer, the most coherent one. He had stopped, and now she was back, not because of him. Because someone had been murdered 13 years ago, and the information had finally found its way to the only person it belonged to. Don't contact her, Roman said. Gideon looked at him. I said, don't contact her. He turned from the window. She came back for her mother, leave her alone, until she decides whether she wants to find me. Gideon left. Roman stood at the window for a long time. He took the wedding ring out of his desk drawer. He had moved it there 3 years ago, the day the search stopped, without quite knowing why he kept it, and he looked at it. He put it back. The hospice facility was 45 minutes west of Boston by car. Celeste drove herself. The March landscape was the specific gray-brown of the season, not quite winter anymore, but not yet anything else. The trees skeletal and the field still flattened from snow weight. The sky a flat pale light that gave nothing away. She drove with the radio off, which she almost never did, because she wanted to think. She thought about her mother, Eleanor Whitmore at 44 years old, on a November highway, alone in a car that had been interfered with. She had been driving home from visiting a friend in western Massachusetts, a fact Celeste had always known, had filed as a simple logistical detail of the last day. She had not known, until today, that the route Eleanor was taking had been changed at the last minute because of a family scheduling conflict that had rerouted her from the highway she usually used to a road that was darker and less traveled and had a curve with known visibility issues. She had not known that the scheduling conflict had been arranged. She had not known that 19-year-old Nadia had been the one to communicate the changed route to an intermediary who had passed it to a man in a gray jacket who made accidents happen. She had not known any of this for 13 years. She pulled into the hospice parking lot. She sat in the car for a moment. She thought about Miles in Florence with Julia, probably at the market by now, probably naming things at high volume in Italian and examining fruit with the concentrated intensity he brought to physical objects. She thought about his weight against her leg on the mornings when he came to find her and simply put himself against her without any particular agenda, like a warm, breathing anchor. She got out of the car. Silas Crane was in a room at the end of a corridor that smelled like clean linen, and something underneath the clean linen that was harder to name. He was smaller than she had imagined thin, the way illness makes people thin, which is different from the thinness of health, pulled rather than lean, with the translucent quality of someone who has begun the particular process of becoming less substantial. He was propped up on pillows. His hands on the blanket were very still. He looked at her when she entered. "You look like her," he said. His voice was thin but clear. Celeste sat in the chair beside the bed. "Tell me what you did," she said. he told her. He told her all of it. He did not apologize first, which she had half expected and half dreaded, because apologies from people in his position tended to be primarily about their own relief rather than anyone else's. He simply told her, in the flat and particular language of a man, reporting a sequence of events he had been carrying for 13 years and had decided to put down. When he finished, the room was quiet. Celeste looked at him. "Say her name," she said. He looked at her. "Say my mother's name," she said. Out loud. "I want to hear you say it." A pause. Something moved in his face. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said. "Thank you," Celeste said. She reached into her bag. She placed a digital recorder on the bedside table. "I need you to say everything you just told me again," she said. With the recorder running, he looked at the recorder. He nodded. She pressed record. And in a room that smelled like clean linen and the underside of time, Silas Crane said Eleanor Whitmore's name again, and then he began to talk, and Celeste sat with her hands in her lap and her back straight and the recorder between them. And she did not cry, and she did not look away, and she did not allow the man across from her to see what the words were doing inside her chest. Because some things you carry in private until you have finished what needs to be done, and only then do you allow yourself to feel the full weight of them. When it was over, she pressed stop. She put the recorder back in her bag. She stood. "Is there anything you need?" she said. She asked it without performance, a plain, direct question. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who was very tired and had stopped expecting to be asked that. "No," he said, "I don't think so." She nodded once. She walked back down the corridor and out into the flat March light, and she sat in her car in the parking lot of a hospice in western Massachusetts, and she pressed both palms flat against the steering wheel, and she stayed there. Eleanor Whitmore had been driving home. She had a friend she'd been visiting. She had a changed route. She had a phone message that didn't reach the person it was meant for. She had a daughter who was 12 years old and who spent the next 13 years believing that the road had been dark and the brake system had failed, and it was nobody's fault. Just the ordinary catastrophe of the world, not holding together the way it should. It was not nobody's fault. It had been somebody's decision. Celeste started the car. She drove back to Boston with the recorder in her bag, and she thought about Lenora Whitmore in her mansion in Chestnut Hill, and she thought about Nadia in the Whitmore Foundation offices with the small window and the portrait she walked past every day, and she thought about what she had spent 3 years building in Florence and what she was about to walk back into. She was not afraid. She was something else entirely, a thing she had not felt since the night she had sat in a bridal suite with a tablet full of her own stolen signature and given herself 7 days to disappear. That night she had run. She was not running now. She picked up her phone. She called Evelyn Shaw. "I have a recording," she said when Evelyn answered, "and I need to know how fast we can move." Evelyn Shaw did not sleep that night. Celeste knew this because she didn't sleep either, and they were on the phone or the encrypted messaging application Evelyn used for sensitive matters until 2:30 in the morning. And when Celeste called again at 6:45, Evelyn picked up on the first ring with the alert, slightly raw quality of someone who had been awake for a while and was running on coffee and the particular fuel that very good attorneys generate when they are working on something that matters. "The recording is clean," Evelyn said immediately. "I had my forensics contact do a preliminary pass last night. Clear audio, no artifacts, timestamp consistent. Silas identified himself by full name and confirmed the date and location at the start. It will hold. What do we need besides the recording? Corroboration. One piece of verifiable external evidence that supports at least one specific detail in Silas's account. The financial trail from the trust diversions is the strongest candidate if Lenora has been moving money through shell structures. For as long as Silas indicates, there will be records. They won't be obvious records, but they'll exist, because money always leaves marks, even when people work very hard to prevent it. How long? To build a case strong enough to bring to the district attorney's office. With a forensic accountant and full access to the trust records, 3 to 4 weeks, assuming cooperation from the trust's oversight board. What about the route information, Nadia? There was a pause. The kind Evelyn used when she was choosing her words, not for softness but for accuracy. Nadia's exposure is significant but complicated, she said. If she provided that information without understanding what it would be used for, that's a different legal situation than if she knew. Silas's account doesn't establish her knowledge, only her action. A prosecutor will look at what can be proved about her state of mind, and that is another pause. That will depend on what other evidence exists. She deleted my mother's phone message, Celeste said. Yes, that is harder to explain as a sin. The deletion of a message to the primary person who might have intervened on the night before the accident. Evelyn didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Celeste was sitting at the small desk in the hotel room she had checked into under her own name. She had stopped performing for anyone. She was done with the careful management of other people's ability to locate her. She had a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the recorder on the desk in front of her, and the window showing a Boston morning that was doing its reliable March thing gray, specific, indifferent. Start the process, Celeste said. I'll get you access to the trust records. Celeste. Evelyn's voice shifted slightly. When you go to the oversight board, Lenora will likely find out within hours. She has contacts there, I know. And Nadia. I know, Celeste said again. She ended the call. She looked at the cold coffee. She picked it up and drank it anyway. She went to see her father first. This was not the strategic choice. The strategic choice would have been to lock the trust records down before anyone with a reason to interfere could be alerted. But strategy was not why she drove to the house in Cambridge, where her father had lived for 30 years, where she had grown up in the east-facing bedroom, where Eleanor Whitmore had kept a garden that received the morning light. The garden was still there, different, less carefully tended, but the bones of it were same in the stone border somewhere her mother had laid herself. The iron bench that needed repainting. Celeste looked at it through the car window for a moment, then went inside. Her father, Aldous Whitmore, was 71 years old and had the quality of a man who had been considerably taller in an earlier version of himself. He was still upright, still precise in his dress, still capable of the particular formal warmth that had served him well in 40 years of institutional life. But some things had reduced slight, not physically, not dramatically, but in the way a fire reduces when the primary fuel has been consumed and it is running on secondary material. He had aged. He looked at her across the kitchen with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite relief, not quite guilt, something between them that didn't have a clean name. Celeste, he said. She sat down at the kitchen table. I need to ask you something, she said. And I need you to not give me the managed version. I need the actual answer. He sat down across from her. He folded his hands on the table with the precision of a man preparing for something he expected to be difficult. What did you know about Lenora's finances, she said. His hands tightened slightly. What has happened? Answer the question. He looked at her. I knew that Lenora managed her own accounts in ways that were... He stopped. There were things I chose not to examine closely. Did you know she was taking money from the trust? I did not know that specifically, he said. His voice was careful. Too careful. The voice of someone maintaining a position rather than reporting a fact. Did you suspect it? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. Dad, she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the word. The first crack in 3 days of iron-straight composure, and she pressed her lips together and waited until it sealed back over. Mom found something. She was going to go to the oversight board. She called your office the night before she died and left a message, and the message was deleted before you could hear it. She watched his face. Did you know about the message? No. That one was fast. Unmanaged. She believed it. Did you ever wonder why the accident felt wrong? He looked at the table. You did, she said. Not a question. I chose, he stopped. There were things I chose not to pursue. Because pursuing them would have meant looking at Lenora. He said nothing. Celeste stood up. She stood at the kitchen table, in the house where she had grown up, in the room where her mother had made breakfast every morning until she didn't, and she looked at her father for a long moment. I have a recording from a man named Silas Crane, she said. Was hired to stage the accident. He is named Lenora. He is also named Nadia. She paused. I am going to the district attorney's office. I am going to the trust's oversight board. I am going to pursue this until it is finished. And when it is finished, Lenora and Nadia will answer for what they did to Mom. Her father looked up at her. His eyes were wet. She had not seen him cry since the funeral. I am also going to need your resignation from the foundation board, she said. Because whatever you knew and chose not to examine made conditions in which Mom could be betrayed, and that has consequences. He flinched. She had not planned to say that. She had planned to say the Lenora part and leave the second part for later. But the second part had been sitting in her chest since Caleb Harlan had first called, and it came out now with the flat, specific weight of something that has been carried too long. I know, her father said. I'll have Evelyn's office send the paperwork, she said. She walked out. She sat in her car in the driveway for 3 minutes. The stone border of her mother's garden was visible at the edge of the windshield. 30-year-old stone, still straight. She pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the financial district. Roman's attorney's office called Evelyn's office at 11:43 in the morning. Evelyn relayed this to Celeste by text. Roman Vescari's legal team has made contact requesting a conversation. Not adversarial in framing. Your call. Celeste read the message at a stoplight. She texted back. My schedule. My terms. His attorney can arrange for him to come to your office tomorrow at 9. Evelyn's reply was immediate. Understood. Then, a beat later, his attorney says, Roman has asked to come alone. No counsel. Celeste looked at the message for a moment. Then she texted, fine. The trust oversight board was not a friendly room. There were 6 members, 3 of whom had been appointed, when Lenora Whitmore had significant influence over the nominating committee. Celeste knew this before she walked in. She walked in anyway. She sat at the head of the table, not because the chair was assigned to her, but because she put her materials there and sat down before anyone suggested otherwise, and the particular quality of her stillness made the suggestion not emerge. She presented the recording. She presented Caleb Harlan's preliminary findings. She presented Evelyn's initial forensic accounting summary, 48 hours of work that had already identified 3 shell structures and 2 intermediary accounts that connected to Lenora's personal financial history. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. When she finished, the room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet, when everyone in them is doing rapid internal calculations. The board chair, a man named Bertram, who had known Celeste's father for 30 years, looked at her over his reading glasses. These are serious allegations, Ms. Whitmore. Yes, she said. And you're prepared to pursue them formally. I've already contacted the district attorney's office. They are reviewing the recording now. This presentation is a courtesy. Bertram, not a question. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the 2 board members who had been Lenora's appointments. I'll need those 2 members to recuse themselves from the vote, Celeste said, without looking at them. Given the conflict of interest, one of them started to speak. The forensic accounting has already identified a payment structure that runs through an entity in which one of you holds a directorship, Celeste said. I'd recommend recusal over the alternative. The room was silent. Both members recused. The remaining 4 voted to freeze the relevant accounts, place the trust under independent oversight, and authorize full cooperation with the district attorney's office in under 11 minutes. Celeste gathered her materials. One more thing, she said, standing. The foundation. I want the board to convene a special session this week to review Lenora Whitmore's executive authority over the charitable programs. That review should be completed before she learns about this meeting. Bertram removed his glasses. That will be difficult to keep quiet. I know. Move as fast as you can, she walked out. Her hands were steady, her heart was not, but her hands were, and for the present moment, the hands were what mattered. Nadia found out at 3 in the afternoon. Celeste had anticipated this. Lenora had a contact on the trust staff, lower level, who would have seen the account freeze notification and made a call. The information would move quickly through the specific, informal network of people whose interests were connected to Lenora's continued position. Nadia's call came to Celeste's hotel room at 3:14. Celeste looked at the number, the same number that had been in her phone for years, under the end contact entry that just said Nadia. The way you only list the name without a qualifier for people who are singular in their category in your life. She answered. What did you do? Nadia's voice had none of the performed composure of the wedding night call. It was stripped, raw and fast, like something that had been under pressure for a long time and had just found an opening. I did what needed to be done, Celeste said. The trust accounts are frozen. Lenora's. I know, you came back here to destroy the family. I came back here because a man who is dying told me that our mother was murdered, Celeste said. And he told me who paid for it. And he told me who gave them the route she was taking. The silence on Nadia's end was different from her silences on the wedding night. That silence had been calculated. This one was not. This one was a person who has just walked into a wall that they did not see coming and has not yet reoriented. Nadia, Celeste said. The route. Do you remember giving someone Mom's route that night? Nothing. The scheduling conflict that moved her from the highway to the secondary road. Someone asked you where she was going. Do you remember? That's, Nadia stopped. Then that was years ago. 13 years ago. You were 19. Did you know what the information was for? I don't, her voice was shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. You deleted her message, Celeste said, to Dad's office. The night before she died. There's a record. The sound on the other end was not words. It was the sound a person makes when something that has been locked in a 13 for years gets the door open suddenly, and the weight of it hits the air. I didn't know, Nadia said. I didn't know what they were going to do. Celeste closed her eyes. She opened them. That is something you are going to need to tell a prosecutor, she said. Not me. Celeste. I'm not the right person for this conversation, Celeste said. I'm not the one you need to convince. Get an attorney. A real one. Not someone connected to Lenora. Get one today before tomorrow morning. She ended the call. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed. She thought about 19 years old. She thought about a girl who had grown up convinced that Eleanor Whitmore was the obstacle between her and legitimacy in a family that had never quite absorbed her. She thought about how much of that conviction had been constructed by a woman named Lenora, carefully, over many years, for reasons that had nothing to do with Nadia and everything to do with the money in a trust account and the woman who was about to expose it. She thought about whether it was possible to have been used as a weapon without knowing you were one. She thought about Miles. She called Florence. Julia answered, and there was noise in the background, Miles, doing something at high volume that resolved into his voice when Julia put the phone near him. Mama? He had called her Mama since before he had words, or rather Mama had been among his first words, along with light and blue and no said with great conviction. Hey Bambino, she said. Train, he said immediately, because when he had new information he led with it. A big train. Julia train. Market. A pause while he processed logistics. Red, you saw a red train at the market? C, satisfied. Information successfully transmitted. Celeste pressed the phone against her cheek for a moment and closed her eyes again and just listened to him, breathing and moving on the other end of the line, the small specific sounds of a 2-year-old existing vigorously in the world. I love you, she said. Mama, he said, which at this stage covered a range of responses, including but not limited to I love you back. She hung up. She thought about whether to call Roman's number. Then she thought about the meeting tomorrow morning at 9, and she decided that tomorrow morning at 9 was soon enough. She ordered room service. She ate without tasting it. She slept for 5 hours, which was more than she expected, and less than she needed, and at 5:30 in the morning she was awake again, and sitting at the desk with the recorder and Evelyn's documents, and the cold, still dark of a March morning. And she did not feel fear, and she did not feel triumph, and she felt something that was simply readiness. The way a structure that has been properly built feels ready for the weight it was designed to carry. Roman arrived at Evelyn's office at 8:58. He was alone. No Gideon, no attorneys. He was wearing a jacket that Celeste recognized dark charcoal, simple cut, the kind he wore when he wanted to not be identified as someone who owned expensive things. He always had that instinct. The ability to dress down or dress neutral without losing the particular quality of self-possession that followed him everywhere, regardless of what he wore. He walked into Evelyn's conference room, and he stopped when he saw Celeste. She was sitting at the near end of the table, not the head. She had chosen deliberately not to take the head. She did not need the architectural advantage. She had other things. They looked at each other. 3 years. He looked not older, exactly, but altered. The same structural quality, the same stillness, but something had changed in the surface layer of it. A kind of erosion. The specific erosion of a man who has been running a machine efficiently for 3 years, with something essential removed from it, and has understood, gradually, what the missing thing was. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She watched him settle. She watched his hands on the table. He did not fold them the way her father had. He laid them flat, separately, the way a person sits who is not managing an image, but also not performing openness. "You came back," he said. "Not for you," she said. "I know, do you? Caleb Harlan, Eleanor." He held her gaze. "I should have," he stopped. "What?" she said. "What should you have?" "I knew something was wrong with how it happened. I knew that in the early days, and he looked at the table briefly. I didn't pursue it, because it was simpler not to. Because I was using your family, and I didn't want to look too closely at anything that might complicate the arrangement." He said this with a flat directness that was worse than defensiveness. Defensiveness she could have worked with. This she had to simply receive. "That's the truth. I'm not going to give you a better version of it." She studied him. "Lenora is being arrested this afternoon," she said. "The DA's office moved faster than I expected. The financial evidence was cleaner than anyone anticipated. She didn't cover it as well as she thought." She paused. "Nadia's situation is more complicated. I know about Nadia." "Gideon." "Yes." She looked at him steadily. "If you have done anything, any pressure, any contact, any interference with Nadia's situation or the DA's process." "No, fast and flat, I have not." She assessed him. "Okay," she said. Something shifted slightly in his expression, not relief, but the adjacent thing. "The thing that happens when you have been holding your breath without being aware of it." "I need to tell you something," she said. "There is something you don't know about why I came back." He waited. Celeste looked at the recorder on the table between them. She looked at the window. She looked at Roman Vescari, the man who had danced with her in golden light and built lies around every absence and used her name as a mechanism and held her through nightmares and been, simultaneously, both of those things in the same body. "After I disappeared," she said, "I found out something." He was still. "I was pregnant when I left." The conference room had very good soundproofing. The silence in it was total. Roman's face did not change immediately. It was the face of a man receiving information that is too large for the immediate response mechanisms, the face that precedes understanding by several seconds months, while the information travels from the surface to wherever the real receiving happens. Then it changed. How he stopped. How long? 6 weeks when I found out. I found out in November, after I'd been gone 3 months. November. He was doing the math. She could see him doing it. "Miles Whitmore," she said. "He is 2 years and 4 months old. He has dark eyes and a very specific way of looking at things. He is in Florence with a woman named Julia right now, and he is probably at the market talking about a red train." Roman's jaw tightened. "You've known for 2 years and—" "Yes. And you didn't know." She did not apologize for the word. She let it stand. "I did not." He pushed back from the table. He stood. He moved to the window the way men move to windows in these moments, not because the window contained anything useful, but because the body needed somewhere to put itself while the mind caught up. His shoulders rose, and then settled. When he turned back, his voice was different. Stripped down, like Nadia's had been on the phone, but made of different material. Where Nadia's had been rawness and panic, Roman's was something quieter and more concentrated. "I want to see him," he said. "I know," she said. "That's all." "I want to see him. I'm not." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "I am not going to use this. I am not going to threaten you. I am not going to put lawyers in a room. I am telling you that I want to see my son." "I know," she said again. He looked at her. "Then why are you looking at me like that?" Because I need you to understand something first, she said. Before you see him. Before anything. She leaned forward slightly. I need you to understand what you gave up. Not in the abstract. Not as a concept. I need you to understand that while you were in Boston, running your empire and looking in the wrong cities, there was a person being born and learning to breathe and having fevers and taking steps and saying his first word. And his first word was light. And you were not there. And that is not something I did to you. That is something that was the consequence of who you were when I walked out that door. Roman looked at her. His eyes were steady, but the steadiness was costing him something. She could see what it cost. What was the fever? He said. She looked at him. You said he had fevers. His voice was very careful. How bad? It was the wrong question and the right question simultaneously. A man cataloging what he missed, starting to understand the weight of the list. 3 weeks after he turned 1, she said. 104. I was alone. I sat in a chair beside his bed all night with a cold cloth, and I kept calling the pediatrician's emergency line, and she kept telling me it was viral and to keep him hydrated, and it would break by morning. Did it. By 4:30, she paused. He slept for 12 hours after that. I sat next to the bed the whole time. Roman looked at the table. He said nothing. He did not have to. The silence between them was different from the silences of 3 years ago. Those had been managed silences, shaped by calculation. This one was simply the sound of two people in the same room with the same knowledge of what had been lost, and neither of them had a word for it that felt adequate to the size of the thing. I need to go to the foundation, Celeste said finally. Nadia is there. The board is convening at noon. Roman looked up. I'll be there, he said. This is not your matter, she said. Gideon will be outside if you need anything, he said. I won't be in the room, but I'm not leaving you alone in this city today. She looked at him for a long moment. Fine, she said. She picked up her materials. She picked up the recorder. She stood. At the door she stopped. Roman, she said. He looked at her. His first word was light, she said. He was pointing at a lamp. He said it very seriously, like he was announcing something important. She watched Roman absorb this. She turned and walked out. The Whitmore Foundation occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a building on Commonwealth Avenue that had been donated by Celeste's grandfather in the 1980s. The lobby had the particular quality of old money applied to charitable purposes, serious art, serious wood, the portrait of Celeste on the wall in the blue dress, looking slightly to the left. Nadia was in her office when Celeste arrived. She had known Celeste was coming. Someone had told her. Or she had heard the building noise of a board convening on short notice, or simply the instinct of someone who has been anticipating a reckoning for years had told her that today was the day. She was sitting at her desk with the specific terrible composure of a person who has been crying and has stopped and is holding the stopped, crying very carefully because the starting again is right there at the surface. Celeste closed the office door. She sat down across from her sister. The portrait of their mother, a small one, family rather than institutional, on the credenza behind Nadia's desk caught her attention for a moment. Eleanor Whitmore at perhaps 35, in a summer, somewhere, squinting slightly into the light, with an expression that was caught between laughing and saying something. Celeste looked at Nadia. I have an attorney coming for you at 1 o'clock, she said. Her name is Patricia Holt. She does not have any connection to Lenora, to the foundation, or to anyone in Roman's circle. She is going to sit with you before the board meeting and advise you on what to say and what not to say, and what your actual legal exposure is. Nadia stared at her. Why, she said. Celeste looked at the table, then back at her sister. Because you were 19, she said. Because Lenora spent years building a version of our mother designed to make you resent her. Because I don't know what you knew and what you didn't, and that matters to me even if it is very inconvenient that it matters to me. She paused. And because she was your mother too. Eleanor was your stepmother, and she was not perfect at it, and she was trying, and she is dead because of what Lenora did. And whatever role you played in it, you have been carrying that for 13 years without knowing what you were carrying. Nadia's composure broke. It didn't break loudly. It was the quiet kind, the eyes, first, then the set of the jaw, then a breath that came out not quite even, and then nothing for a moment, and then a sound that was small and came from somewhere deeper than the chest. Celeste did not move toward her. She did not reach across the desk. She sat where she was, and she let Nadia be in what she was in, because some things require the space to be felt without being managed. After a while, Nadia pressed both hands flat on the desk and straightened. "The message," she said. "I deleted the message because Lenora told me Eleanor was trying to cut you out of the inheritance. She told me Eleanor had been moving trust assets to protect them specifically from being shared with me." Her voice was very thin. "She said the call to your father was part of that. That if he heard it, he would take action, and it would be too late to stop it." She stopped. I believed her. Celeste was quiet. "She told you a lie," Celeste said. "Mom was calling to report the money that Lenora was taking." Nadia closed her eyes. Celeste said, "The route information." Someone called. Nadia's voice was barely audible. "Said they were a friend of your mother's, trying to arrange a surprise. Asked which road she was taking that night, because they wanted to be at the right location." She stopped. I didn't know. I thought it was someone planning something for her." "Did Lenora tell you to expect that call?" A long silence. "She said someone might call about Eleanor's plans for that evening," Nadia said. "She said it was related to a business matter, and to just answer honestly," her eyes opened. "They were wrecked not with performance, but with the specific devastation of someone understandings, fully for the first time the shape of a thing they have been living inside of for 13 years. She used me. She used me as a tool, and I didn't even know I was being held." Celeste absorbed this. She thought about Roman in the conference room. "I was using your family." She thought about how many people in her life had been using something or someone without the person being used understanding the mechanism. She looked at her sister. "Patricia Holt is going to be here at 1, she said. "Tell her everything you just told me. Exactly as you told me. Nothing managed, nothing edited. The prosecutor will be significantly more interested in Lenora than in you if your account is clean and consistent." Nadia nodded. Celeste stood. "One more thing," she said. Nadia looked at her. "I have a son," Celeste said. "His name is Miles. He is 2 years old and he lives in Florence. He is Roman's." She paused. "I am telling you this because the next period is going to be complicated for the family, and I need the people in his life to be people who have been honest with me. Whatever you are going to be going forward, whatever that looks like, start it by being honest." She picked up her bag. She walked to the office door. Behind her, Nadia said, "Celeste." Celeste stopped. She didn't turn. "I don't know how to." Nadia stopped. "There is nothing I can say." "No," Celeste agreed. "Not right now." She opened the door. "Maybe not for a long time." She walked out. Lenora Whitmore was arrested at 11:47 that morning. The investigators arrived at the Chestnut Hill mansion. While Lenora was in the middle of a phone call, she had been making calls since 9 that morning, working the network, pulling on every connection that might create delay or interference. The calls had produced very little, because the evidence was substantially cleaner than she had believed possible, and the people she was calling had looked at the situation and made their calculations. There were cameras outside the mansion. Not press, nobody had tipped the press yet. But a neighbor's security system caught the arrival of the vehicles and the departure 11 minutes later. Celeste was at the foundation when Evelyn texted her. "Done. 11:47. She read the message, standing in the corridor outside the boardroom, where the foundation's special session was 20 minutes from beginning. She put her phone in her bag. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Her mother had walked down a road in November 13 years ago and not come home. And for 13 years, the world had treated this as the kind of thing the world sometimes did, the random mechanical failure. The ice on the curve, the dark road without witnesses. And the people who had made it happen had walked back into ordinary life and sat at tables and sent cards on the anniversary and looked at the portrait in the lobby and managed their guilt or buried it. Or, in Lenora's case, simply continued operating as if the thing that had been done was simply a problem that had been successfully solved. Celeste thought about Eleanor at 35 in the summer photograph, squinting into light. She thought about a highway in November. She thought about a 12-year-old girl who had understood, without being told, that the adults in her life had decided the correct response to catastrophe was to continue composedly and not look at the seams. She had learned that lesson completely. She had spent 30 years being composed. She straightened her jacket. She pushed open the boardroom door. The board members were already seated. For 6 of them remaining, Lenora's 2 appointments had withdrawn that morning, citing undisclosed conflicts, which was the most anyone had expected from them. The 6 remaining members looked up when Celeste entered, and she recognized in their collective expression the specific quality of institutional people who understand that something significant is happening and are trying to establish where their interests lie. She walked to the head of the table. She sat down. She put her recorder, Evelyn's documents, and the forensic accounting summary on the table in front of her. She looked at each person in the room. "My name is Celeste Whitmore," she said. "My mother founded this institution. My name has been on the wall of this lobby for 3 years in a portrait commissioned to commemorate my 30 years of service to the principles she established." She paused. "Today I'm going to tell you what has been done to this institution, and what was done to the person who created it, and what we are going to do about both of those things starting this afternoon." The room was absolutely still. "Let's begin," she said. The board meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Celeste spoke for the first 40 of those minutes without interruption, which was not because the board members had nothing to say, but because the quality of what she presented did not leave room for the usual institutional mechanisms of deflection and delay. The forensic accounting summary alone, 48 hours of work by a woman Evelyn had pulled from a retainer arrangement with a firm that specialized in exactly this kind of excavation, documented 11 years of systematic diversion through 4 shell structures and 2 intermediary accounts, totaling an amount that made 2 of the 6 board members audibly exhale when the number was placed on the table. The 5th board member, a woman named Constance, who had been on the foundation since Eleanor's tenure and who had the particular upright quality of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to be said aloud, asked only one question during the entire presentation. "How long have you known?" she asked. 3 days, Celeste said. Constance nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had calculated. "I wanted on the record that I requested a financial review of the Foundation's operational accounts 18 months ago, and was told by Lenora that it was unnecessary and would create an impression of institutional distrust." "That will be on the record," Celeste said. The vote to remove Lenora Whitmore from all executive authority over the Foundation's programs, freeze the remaining discretionary accounts pending full audit, and place the charitable portfolio under independent oversight was unanimous. It took 4 minutes. The motion was seconded before Celeste finished reading it aloud. She drove back to the hotel at 4 in the afternoon. She sat on the edge of the bed and took her shoes off and looked at the wall. It was done. Not finished, the legal process would take months, possibly years, and Lenora had attorneys who would work every available angle, and Nadia's situation was complicated in ways that would require careful navigation, and her father's resignation from the foundation board would create a vacancy that needed to be filled thoughtfully, and Miles was in Florence with Julia, and she needed to get back to him as soon as possible. And there were approximately 40 things that required her attention before the week was out. But it was done in the sense that mattered. The machine that had been running her mother's death as a closed case for 13 years had been interrupted. The people who had made decisions on that November night were no longer operating without consequence. Eleanor Whitmore's name was no longer attached to an accident. It was attached to a truth. Celeste looked at the wall for a long time. Then she lay back on the bed, fully dressed, shoes off, and she pressed her forearm over her eyes, and she stayed there. She didn't cry. She had expected to cry at some point in this week, expected it as a matter of basic physiology, because she was a person with a functional interior, and this week had contained things that would have leveled most people. But the crying didn't come. What came instead was a kind of deep, total exhaustion that was not unpleasant. The exhaustion that follows when you have been carrying something heavier than your normal load for a very long time, and you have finally been able to set it down, and your body is doing the accounting of what that weight actually was. She thought about her mother. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore at 44, which was 6 years younger than Celeste would be in another 6 years, which meant that Eleanor had been young. She had known this abstractly, had known her mother died young, but the specific arithmetic of it landed differently now. 6 years younger than Celeste would be, still in the middle of things, still in the part of life where you discover what you're actually building. She had been building something, the audit, the oversight board, the evidence she was compiling. She had been trying to protect the trust, protect the family's charitable for commitments, protect the things she had spent years building and caring about. She had called your father's office and left a message, and she had driven home on a road that had been prepared for her. Celeste pressed her arm harder against her eyes. She was not going to let this be only grief. She had come here and done what she came to do, and her mother's case was open and moving, and the people responsible were accountable. That was not a small thing. That was the thing Eleanor had been trying to do on the last day of her life, and it had taken 13 years and a dying man in a hospice and a woman who had learned, through the specific curriculum of a very difficult 3 years, that her own name was more powerful than she had been treating it. She had used it. Eleanor would have used it. That felt, if not like comfort, then like continuity. She took her arm off her eyes. She looked at the ceiling. Then she picked up her phone and called Julia. Miles was already in bed. It was past 9 in Florence. Julia spoke in a low voice that meant she was in the other room, and she said Miles had asked about Mama twice at dinner and had eaten well, and the train from the market was currently sharing his pillow. "Thank you," Celeste said. "Stai bene?" Julia asked. "Are you okay?" Celeste said. "Domani meglio. Better tomorrow." She meant it. Roman was outside the hotel. Not inside, not in the lobby outside, across the street, in a car that had been there since she arrived back at 4 and was still there at 7 when she came back down because she needed to walk, and standing in a hotel room was no longer something she could do. She saw the car immediately, the way you notice something that is trying not to be noticed by someone who knows your habits. She crossed the street. She knocked on the window. Roman got out. They stood on the sidewalk in the March evening, the city moving around them with its reliable indifference, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Gideon told you about Lenora," she said, "and the board." "Yes. And you've been sitting out here since when?" "Since about 1, he said. She looked at him. "Why?" He looked at the street, then back at her. "Because I didn't have anything useful to offer, and I knew that, and I wasn't ready to leave." She absorbed this. "Walk with me," she said. They walked. Boston, at 7 in the evening, in March, was not a gentle city. The wind came off the water, and the light was thin, and there was still dirty snow at the edges of the sidewalks from the last storm. The gray, compressed remnants of something that had been clean once. They walked without a destination, which was unusual for both of them, and for several blocks, neither of them spoke. When she was arrested, Roman said finally, "Did you feel?" "No," Celeste said. "Not the way you think." "No. I thought I would. I thought there would be something that felt like I don't know. Resolution, closure, whatever that's supposed to feel like." She kept walking. "But she's still arrested, and my mother is still dead. Those two things are both true at the same time, and the first one doesn't change the second." Roman was quiet. "What I felt," Celeste said, "was that my mother deserved to have someone be angry on her behalf. And I was. And I used that. And now it's done, and the anger is spent, and what's left is just," she paused, "just the fact of her being gone, which was always the fact. We just had a cleaner explanation now." "Is that enough?" Roman said. She looked at him. "It has to be." They walked past a restaurant that was full and loud, the sound of it bleeding briefly into the street and then receding. A couple coming out of the door laughed at something, one of them said, and it was the ordinary explosive laughter of people in the middle of a good evening, the kind that has no self-consciousness in it. Celeste watched them. "I need to go back to Florence," she said. "In the next 2 or 3 days. Miles needs to be home. His routine is," she stopped. "He has a routine. He is very serious about it." Roman said nothing for a step. Then tell me about his routine. She looked at him sideways. If you want to, he said. And the quality of the wanting in those 4 words was not the wanting of someone building a legal case or constructing a position. It was bare. It was the wanting of someone standing outside a house that has light in the windows and warmth coming from underneath the door and no certainty of being let inside. She told him. She told him about the 5:45 mornings and the Italian that had arrived fully formed at 14 months. She told him about the trains and the way Miles organized them by color before he organized them by function, which suggested to her a very particular kind of mind. She told him about the pediatrician, who called him Il Serio Bambino, and the way Miles had corrected a market vendor's Italian once accurately at 22 months, to the vendor's enormous amusement. She told him about the way Miles ate, which was methodical, one thing at a time, never mixed, with the focused concentration of someone taking work seriously. She told him about the afternoon, 3 months ago, when Miles had found a small injured bird on the balcony and had stood over it for 45 minutes, entirely still, watching it with an expression of such concentrated concern that Celeste had sat down on the balcony floor just to be present in whatever that was. Roman listened. He listened mattered without when something the space, without inserting himself, just absorbing. When she finished, they had been walking for 40 minutes and were standing on the edge of the public garden, the public garden. The lights of the city reflected in the waters, the old smotes docked for winter. I want to be there, Roman said, whatever that looks like. Whatever you're willing to allow. I want to know him. I know, she said. That's not an answer. Yes, it is, she said. I said I know, I'm not saying no. She looked at the water. I'm saying that how this works is something we figure out carefully, not quickly, not on my terms alone or yours, with him at the center of it. His stability, his understanding of who is in his life and why. Agreed. You need to be someone he can count on, she said. Not someone who shows up and disappears. Not someone whose availability is contingent on other things. If you're going to be his father, you are his father. Full stop. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It means you have to be consistent. Agreed, he said again. She turned and looked at him directly. And it doesn't mean you and I know, he said. I need to say it clearly. I know what you're saying. His voice was even. Being Miles's father is not a mechanism for being your husband again. I understand that. I'm not asking for that. She studied him. What are you asking for? She said. He was quiet for a moment. The water moved slightly. Somewhere behind them a car passed, and the sound of it faded into the ordinary texture of the city. A chance to show him who I can be, Roman said. Not who I was. Who I can be, when there's something that matters more than everything else. He paused. He matters more than everything else. I understood that in a conference room this morning when you told me, and I have not stopped understanding it since. Celeste looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. She visited Nadia the next morning. Not at the foundation. Nadia had not been back to the foundation. She was at her apartment, which was in a building in the South End, that Celeste had never been to, and she found this briefly disorienting that her sister had a life with a physical location, that Celeste had never visited, that there was a door and a hallway and a window and a kitchen that constituted the daily architectures of someone she had known her entire life, and knew in some ways not at all. Nadia answered the door in clothes she had clearly slept in. She looked like she had been through something that had scrubbed several layers off the surface. And what was underneath was younger looking and rawer, and in some way more recognizable than the version of Nadia that Celeste had known for the past decade. Patricia called me this morning, Nadia said. She thinks she said if I cooperate fully, the exposure is manageable. The route information was provided without knowledge of intent. The message deletion is more serious, but there's an argument around what I understood it to be. She stopped. She said the prosecutor is primarily focused on Lenora. That's likely accurate, Celeste said. I'm going to cooperate fully, Nadia said. I've already given a statement. Everything I told you, everything I could remember. All of it. Celeste nodded. They were standing in the hallway of the apartment, which was awkward, and after a moment, Nadia stepped back and Celeste came inside. The apartment had the quality of a place that was decorated with intention, but lived in without particular care, good things on the walls. Furniture chosen thoughtfully, but surfaces that had accumulated the small entropy of a person who lives alone and has stopped performing tidiness for an imagined audience. A coffee mug on the counter, books stacked without system on the table, a coat on the back of a chair. Celeste sat on the couch. Nadia sat across from her. "I've been thinking about something," Nadia said. She picked at the edge of her sleeve, the portrait. In the lobby, Celeste waited. "I used to hate it," Nadia said. "I walked past it every day, and it felt like evidence. Evidence of something I didn't have access to. The name, the standing, the all of it." She stopped. "I want you to know that I understand now that the resentment I built around you was something Lenora helped construct. That's not an excuse. It's just," she stopped again. "I made choices inside that resentment, real choices with real consequences. I don't get to hand those off to Lenora just because she helped build the framework." Celeste was quiet. "No," she said finally, "you don't." "I know. But," Celeste said, and the word cost her something to locate, "I also can't pretend that you're the same as Lenora. Because you're not. Lenora knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it for money. You were a 19-year-old girl who was handed a false version of your family and a false version of your mother, and you acted inside that false version. That's different." She paused. "I'm not saying it's fine. I'm saying it's different." Nadia looked at her. "What happens now?" Nadia said. "With us? I don't know," Celeste said. "I think the honest answer is that I don't know. I'm not going to tell you that everything is forgiven and we move forward as if none of this happened. I'm also not going to tell you that this is the end. I don't know what it is. I think it's the beginning of a very long process of finding out." "That's fair," Nadia said quietly. "You have a nephew," Celeste said. Nadia looked up. "His name is Miles. He's 2. He lives in Florence, and he takes trains very seriously, and he spoke Italian before English." She paused. "That is information. Not an invitation, but information." Nadia's eyes filled. She pressed her hand against her mouth. She nodded. Celeste stood. "Patricia is good," she said. "Trust her. Be completely honest with her. Don't manage what you tell her." "I won't." Celeste walked to the door. She stood with her hand on the handle. "Nadia," she said. Nadia looked at her. "She was my mother too," Celeste said. "Eleanor. She was mine, and you never got to have her the way I did, and that was an injustice that happened to you. I want you to know that I know that." She paused. "What was done to her was also done to you. You just didn't know it yet." She opened the door and left. She stood in the hallway outside, and she pressed her back against the wall. For a moment, the plaster cooled through her jacket, and she breathed. She was done. Not with the legal process that would continue without her daily presence, managed by Evelyn and Patricia and the DA's office and the Trust's independent oversight board and the various institutional mechanisms that had been set in motion. But she was done with what she had come here to do. She had arrived. She had signed her name. She had put the recording on the table. She had sat in the room. She pushed off the wall and walked to the elevator. She booked the flight for Thursday morning. Wednesday evening, she had dinner with Tessa at a restaurant in the South End that they had eaten at several times before Celeste disappeared. A small place with too many tables and food that was better than it needed to be, and a noise level that required slightly raised voices, which suited the kind of dinner where you needed the cover of ambient sound. Tessa had ordered wine before Celeste sat down, which was her version of an opening statement. "You look different," Tessa said. "Different how?" "Lighter." She considered this. "Not happy, exactly. But like you put something down, I did. How are you actually?" Celeste picked up her wine glass.
"I'm actually tired and wait."
"I'm actually ready to be home. She paused. "I think I'm okay. I think I will be okay. I think those are different statements, and both of them are true right now." Tessa looked at her steadily with the 17 years of knowing quality that was one of the most specific and irreplaceable things in Celeste's life. "And, Roman, we're figuring it out. That sounds extremely mature and not at all like how I imagined it." "How did you imagine it?" "I don't know. More screaming, probably." Celeste almost laughed. The almost law turned into an actual laugh, small but real, The first one in a week that wasn't controlled. There was a conference room, she said. It was not dramatic, which was somehow worse than dramatic. Worse? Dramatic would have been easier to process. What it actually was. She set the glass down. He listened. He didn't defend himself. He asked about the fever. Tessa looked at her. Miles had a bad fever when he was 1, Celeste said. I mentioned it, and Roman asked about it. He wanted to know if it broke. She pressed her lips together. That was the moment I understood that this was real. That when he actually understood what he missed. Not the concept of it, the specific fever. Celeste. I'm not going back to him, she said quickly. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that he is Miles's father, and Miles is going to know him, and I am. She stopped. I am choosing to believe that the man who asked about the fever is also real. Alongside the man who did everything else. Both real. Tessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that is an extremely difficult thing to hold. Yes, Celeste agreed. You're going to hold it anyway. Apparently. They ate. They talked about other things, Tessa's work. A film they had both seen separately, and could now discuss, the restaurant's inexplicably excellent bread. The ordinary texture of a friendship that had survived 3 years of intermittent contact and a significant amount of collective catastrophe, and was still, fundamentally, the same thing it had always been, which was 2 people who found each other's company specifically restful, in a way neither of them found most other company. At the end of the meal, Tessa reached across the table and put her hand over Celeste's. Eleanor would have liked what you did this week, she said. Celeste looked at her. I mean it, Tessa said. The recording. The board. Walking back into the foundation and sitting at the head of that table. She stopped. She was that kind of person, someone. She would have recognized it. Celeste looked at the table. I know, she said quietly. She meant it. Thursday morning, she checked out of the hotel at 6:40. She had 1 bag, the same bag she had left Boston with 3 years ago, or a version of it, same size, different contents, different person carrying it. She stood outside the hotel on the sidewalk for a moment. The March morning was cold and very clear, the sky the specific pale blue of early light before the day fully committed to itself. The city was just beginning delivery trucks, the first of the commuters, a woman walking a large deliberate dog. Her phone buzzed. Roman safe flight. Tell him the blue train says hello. She stood on the sidewalk and read the message. She texted back. He doesn't know you yet. You can tell him yourself. She put her phone in her bag and walked to the waiting car. Miles was at the door when she came up the stairs. He had heard the elevator. He always heard the elevator. He had assigned it a specific significance in his understanding of the building's sounds. And its arrival was the signal for a full cessation of whatever he was doing, which in this case had been a floor-based construction project involving every train he owned. He was standing at the door in his pajamas when Julia opened it, and he looked at Celeste for exactly 1 second, with the assessing expression he used when verifying that something matched his expectation of it. And then he crossed the distance between them at the particular determined speed of a 2-year-old who has decided that speed is the appropriate response. She caught him. She picked him up and held him against her shoulder, and he was warm and smelled like sleep, and the specific shampoo Julia used, and his arms went around her neck with the complete, uncomplicated certainty of a small person's who does not question whether he is welcome. Mama, he said, into her neck. I know, she said. I know. I'm here. Julia tactfully disappeared to the kitchen. Celeste stood in the doorway of her Florence apartment, holding her son, and she let herself have the full weight of it, the relief, the love, the particular fierce protectiveness that had lived in her chest since the delivery room in Florence and had not diminished by a single degree in 2 years and 4 months. She let herself feel all of it without managing it or shaping it or making it useful. After a moment, Miles pulled back and looked at her, with the assessing expression again. Train, he announced, a status update. I see, she said, looking at the construction on the floor. Broke. He was matter-of-fact. The bridge section had collapsed in her absence. This was information she needed. Can we fix it? She asked. He considered the structural challenge. Sigh, he decided, and wriggled to be put down, and went back to work. She sat on the floor beside him. She had been quiet. She had been sitting on floors in this apartment since he could first sit, and it was one of the things she had learned in Florence that she would not have expected to learn, that floors were the correct place for many important things. That the view from the floor was specific and clear and had none of the distortions that came from height. They worked on the bridge for 20 minutes. Miles narrated. She assisted. The bridge was rebuilt to specifications, which required 2 attempts because the first attempt had an architectural flaw he identified immediately and communicated with a look of such focused dissatisfaction that she corrected it without being asked. When the construction was complete, he ran a train across the bridge 3 times to verify structural integrity. Satisfied, he handed her the blue one. She held it. He looked at her holding it. Blue, he said. Educational, not interrogative. He was teaching her the name of the thing, in case she had forgotten. Blue, she confirmed. He nodded once, gravely, and went back to the tracks. She held the blue train in her palm, and she looked at her son, and she thought about the next thing. Not the legal proceedings that would continue for months. Not the complicated and ongoing question of Nadia. Not her father, who had called her Wednesday evening and spoken for a long time in a voice that was stripped of the managed quality and had underneath it the sound of an old man who had looked at something he'd been avoiding for a decade and could not avoid anymore. Not Roman, who had texted about the blue train and who would be the subject of a careful, patient, difficult construction project that would take years and might never be finished, but that she had decided to attempt because Miles deserved a father who was present, and she had watched Roman ask about the fever and had believed him. She thought about the next thing, which was this: the morning light coming through the window of the apartment on the narrow street in the Oltrarno, and the trains on the floor, and the small, serious person who was currently explaining something technical to a wooden engine, and, in fact, that she had built this, quietly and without permission from anyone, out of a week of catastrophe and 3 years of deliberate daily work. She had come to Florence because it was far enough, and because the light was good for the kind of work she did, and because nobody knew her name there. She had stayed because Miles had been born here, and because the city was patient in the particular way that old cities were patient, and because the woman downstairs spoke Italian, and the man at the bakery opened at 5:30, and nobody asked her where she was from, or what she was running from, or when she was going to be finished, being whoever she was becoming. She was not finished. She suspected she would never be finished, in the sense of completed, arrived, fully realized. She had stopped expecting that. It seemed to her now like an expectation worth releasing the idea that there was a version of yourself waiting at the end of the difficulty, perfect and resolved, that you were working your way toward. The actual thing, the actual life, was this: the floor of an apartment in Florence, the blue train in her palm, the bridge rebuilt after collapse. You rebuilt the bridge. You ran the train across it. You handed someone else the blue one so they could learn the name of the color. That was the work. Miles abandoned the main line and came to sit beside her. He sat with the simple, unceremonious quality he had when he had decided that proximity was what was needed, no particular agenda, just the placement of himself next to the person he wanted to be next to. He leaned against her arm. She looked at the side of his face. The dark eyes focused on the trains. Roman's eyes, her grandmother's mouth, his own specific mind that was entirely his own and was going to build things and understand things and ask questions that she was not yet equipped to answer, and she would have to find the answers or find the right person to help her find them. She was going to make mistakes. She was already making mistakes and would continue to. She had kept a child from his father for 2 years and 4 months, and she had done it for reasons that were real, and she would have to carry the weight of that alongside the reasons. She had walked away from her family for 3 years, and she had done it because it was necessary, and she had still left her father alone, with a guilt he was not equipped to manage. She had sat across from Nadia this week and said true things and useful things, and had not found a way to say the things that were also true, which was that she missed her sister, had always missed the version of her sister that might have been if the circumstances had been different, and did not know how to grieve the loss of a relationship that had never quite existed in the form she had needed it to. She was imperfect at a number of specific and important things. She was here. That was the other half of the accounting. She was here, in Florence, in the morning, on the floor, with her son against her arm and the blue train in her palm, and 3 years of a life she had built from nothing, and the knowledge, finally, that her mother had not died because the road was dark and the brakes failed. Eleanor Whitmore had died because she had tried to protect something. Celeste had spent 3 years protecting something. The something was different, but the impulse was the same, and she recognized it in herself with the specific feeling of understanding where a quality comes from, not inherited in the passive sense, but chosen. The way you choose what to carry forward, from the people who shaped you, what to keep and what to put down. She had kept this. Eleanor would have kept it. That was enough. Miles turned and looked at her with the abrupt, full attention he sometimes deployed without warning, the look that meant he was about to say something he considered significant. "Home," he said. She looked at him. "We're home," she agreed. He considered this, verified it against his assessment of the room, the trains, the light from the window. Satisfied, he returned to the tracks. Celeste closed her fingers around the blue train. The morning light moved across the floor, the way it always did at this hour, in this apartment, slowly, without hurry, with the patience of something that had been doing this for a very long time, and understood that there was no urgency in the movement of light, that it would arrive where it was going, without being forced. She was not running. She was not hiding. She was not performing for anyone. She was sitting on the floor of a room in Florence with her son, and the bridge was rebuilt, and the train was blue, and outside the city was doing what it had done for centuries, standing in the light, old and permanent and entirely itself, full of things that had survived worse than this and were still, improbably, beautiful. She opened her hand. She looked at the blue train in her palm for a moment. Then she set it on the tracks and watched Saul send it across the bridge, and she stayed where she was, and she stayed where she was, and she did not disappear.